Hello, welcome to Fabulous Food. Today we're going to be making some jam tarts. So to start with, we need to preheat our ovens. So that's 200 degrees centigrade or 180 degrees if you've got a fan oven. And then you need to make sure that you've got a suitable tin for your jam tarts, like that. But you don't need to grease it. When you're working with pastry, you don't need to grease the tin. So first of all, we're going to weigh out our flour. So bowl on the scales, set it to 0, and then you want 200 grams of plain flour. And to the plain flour, we're going to add half a teaspoon of salt, like that. And then we need 100 grams of fat or margarine or Trex, which is a special kind of fat that's used for pastry. So bowl set back to 0 on the scales, and then 100 grams of fat. So we're going to take the bowl off the scales so we don't break them. And then I'm just going to use my knife just to begin to cut up the fat and begin to coat it with flour before I put my fingers in the bowl. And then we're going to rub the fat into the flour using the tips of our fingers, just like we did in Year 7 when we made fruit crumble, and I'm sure we've made other things where we've done rubbing in. So thumb across the tips of your fingers. The tips of your fingers are very cool compared to the palms of your hands, and we don't want to melt the fat, we just want to rub it in to the flour and the salt. So break up the big lumps of fat, get them coated with flour, and then just keep going until your mixture resembles fine breadcrumbs. And make sure that you get right to the bottom of the bowl where all the dry flour will be hiding. And a good way of checking to see if you're ready, if you're nearly there, is to give the bowl a shake, and you'll see that the big lumps of fat come to the surface, and then you can work on those to keep rubbing those in until everything looks like fine breadcrumbs. Okay, so I'm there now. Just going to rub the worst of the breadcrumbs off of my fingers and then go and wash my hands before we move on to the next stage. So the next thing to do is to add 2 tablespoons of cold water. So cold water from the tap that is very cold, or if you've got a bottle of water in your fridge, that will be fridge cold. And then use your table knife just to bring your pastry together now. So remember, always around the edge of the bowl to get the dry ingredients to come down into the middle. And just keep working it through, and you should see that it begins to stick together like that. Sometimes 2 tablespoons of water won't be quite enough. Flour absorbs water at different rates. That's looking quite dry at the moment. So I'm just going to put one hand in and just see if it's going to come together. No, that's far too dry. So I'm going to put probably another half a tablespoon of water in. Back to my knife. See if that will bring it together, and if not, I'll just add a little bit more. So that's getting better. I think it's still going to be a bit crumbly to roll out though. I'm going to put one more half tablespoon in, like that. So I've used 3 tablespoons altogether, and I think that will be plenty. So I can see that's coming together much better now. So it's a bit trial and error. You can see it's come together in a nice ball like that. So I tip it out onto my work surface with all the crumbs. I'm just going to gently bring it together and knead it a little bit before I roll it out. You mustn't overwork the pastry because it will become tough. I'm going going to take my rolling pin, put a tiny bit of flour down on my work surface to stop the pastry sticking. I'm going to roll it out to the thickness of a £1 coin, just very gently. So when we're rolling, a couple of rolls, turn it round. If it sticks to the rolling pin, just wipe it off like that. A couple of rolls, turn it round, give it a wiggle and keep going until you get to the thickness of a £1 coin. You can see mine's actually beginning to stick to my rolling pin now. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of flour on the top of my pastry, and that should help it and stop it sticking quite so much. So I've rolled my pastry out, and I'm now going to use my cutter to cut the shapes for the pastry. So when you get your tin, put your cutter in. It needs to be slightly bigger than the diameter at the top of the circle there, so you've got enough pastry to sit in the bottom of the tin and come up the sides. And then see how many you can cut out. So put them as close together as possible, because we want to avoid overworking our pastry, which means keeping on having to gather up all the leftovers and re-roll them, and that will make the pastry very tough. So out of my first rolling, I've got 11 circles there. So then I'm going to gather up all the extra pieces to expose the edges of the circles, and it's much better to do it this way than to try and pick up your circles from that whole piece of pastry. This will give us access to the circles much better. So I've got my tin now. I've got a palette knife. If you've got a palette knife, this is a good thing to use. Otherwise you can just use your table knife. I'm just going to gently wriggle it underneath the circle of pastry, and then pop that circle of pastry into my tin, and you'll see if I just press it down gently, it's the perfect size. So I'm going to do that for all of them. It's quicker just to lay your circles onto your tin and then press them all down together at the end. So I've got 11 circles now. I'm just going to gently ease them down. Try not to rip the pastry, because if you rip it, the jam's going to escape when we bake them. If you do rip it, just gently use your fingers to stick the pastry back together to itself. So that's 11, and then I'm going to repeat that process with the bits of pastry I didn't use last time. So just gently squeeze those together, and then we're going to re-roll that, and I'll just keep going until I've used all my pastry up. So I've cut out my 12th circle there, and then you can choose. You could either use the rest of this pastry to keep going and make more jam tarts, or you could do what the recipe book says as an extension, which is to cut out little shapes of pastry to put on top of your jam tarts. So I've got this little circle shape here, and I'm just going to cut as many of those out as I can, and then I can use that to decorate the tops of some of my jam tarts, even if I can't decorate all of them. So the final job is to put our filling into the jam tart. So in your recipe book it says that you can use jam, or you could use a lemon curd. We say to you that you can't use chocolate spread because that's got nuts in it, but if you're at home and you don't have a nut allergy, you could use that. But I'm just going to use some basic jam, and you only want to fill your tarts halfway, otherwise when the jam melts it will bubble over the edges and you'll be, well, it'll be very difficult to get your tarts out of the tin. So just fill them halfway. It might not look enough, but it will be absolutely fine. Don't forget to add your pastry shapes and then bake the tarts in a hot oven for 10 to 15 minutes. So I've just taken my jam tarts out of the oven. They actually had 18 minutes to bake until they got to this golden colour, and only one of mine has just bubbled over a little bit there, so I'm just going to ease the jam away now so it doesn't set and then I won't be able to get the jam tart out. But you can see why you only need to half fill them, because now they actually look perfectly full. I'm going to leave them to cool in the tin because that jam will be boiling hot at the moment and will burn you if you spill it on your fingers. So leave yours too until they're cold enough to touch and then enjoy them. We look forward to seeing some of your pictures on the Google Classroom, and I hope your jam tarts go well. Bye bye.